Hi, I'm Taunsend Sonders. Currently, I'm an assistant wrestling coach here at Arizona State University. I was also a two-time All-American at Arizona State University. After my college career, I wrestled internationally, where I won 2 Pan-American Games gold medals, 1 Goodwill Games gold medal, and an Olympic Games silver medal. One of my favorite techniques was an arm throw and an arm spin. In this video, I'll try to show you as many of those as I can. Remember, on a lot of these arm throws is to have your feet in a good position. One of the techniques I try to really stress is for a correct arm throw is to have a back step. So I'm in a staggered stance, and again, I want to use like lines on a mat to try to teach this technique. I put one foot on a line on the mat, and to get a back step, I want to really back step with the trail leg. Back step behind, almost right behind is my heel. From here, I rotate on the balls of my feet, and I can raise up with my hips. This way I can load up an opponent up on top of me and throw him to his back. So again, I'm in a staggered stance, and I back step behind my heel, rotate on the balls of my feet, and I can raise my hips up. So again, I'm in a staggered stance, my back step comes up, and right behind my heel, I want to rotate on the balls of my feet. Front staggered step, back step, rotate on the balls of my feet. Another variation I want to show on the drills is on the back step. I showed you where I stepped in front and I back step. I pivot on the balls of my feet to load an opponent up on my hips. Another variation I'll try to do is I'll back step, but I'll rotate all the way around. And one of the things I want to try to think of is basically trying to turn a full 270 degrees. So a lot of times I'll try to go ahead and face one wall when I'm teaching this technique. I'll have wrestlers face one wall, and instead of turning all the way 180 degrees, I want to continue the other 90 degrees, and I should finish at about 270 degrees. So again, I back step, pivot on the balls of my feet, come down to a knee, and I should be about 270. Again, back step, pivot, 270 degrees. Technique I want to hit off of some of these throws besides a back step is basically a back arch. So what I want to do is basically just back arch all the way to the mat. And a lot of times we can do this with a partner where I'll grab his wrist and allow him to just go ahead and go straight back where he can touch his head. Again. And we can alternate back and forth where I'll go, come back up. Mostly I want to get familiar with this type of position and be ready to go ahead and arch all the way back and come all the way down to the mat. This prevents that fear factor that a lot of wrestlers will have of arching back and not wanting to go all the way to the back or landing on their neck. So drill this technique so I can become familiar with back arch. One of the first techniques I like to hit is an arm throw. And what I would do is try to get an opponent to lay his arm on top of me. And a lot of times I would set him up by either pulling on it real hard or try to get him to really hang on my shoulder a little bit. Because this is the technique this is the arm I'm going to use to really throw him with. Again, I want to get in a good staggered stance position because I'm going to back step and come up underneath him, load him up and throw him. I'm catching his arm. I'm in a staggered stance. I back step to get underneath his body so I can load up on him. I get my shoulder right about where his armpit is. From here, I can load him up on my hips and take him to his back. One key point I want to make on this one is when I get him to touch my shoulder, he touches my shoulder, I try to catch the inside of his bicep and his forearm with the inside of my hand. So I open up my hand a little bit and use basically my thumb, my wrist area, to hook on this part of his forearm. That little hook right there prevents his arm from slipping back out. So I'm in a staggered position, back step, put my shoulder up underneath. I have this hook. I load him up. I use my wrist to hook his forearm and his bicep. Back step, get his shoulder in there, and I have this hooked right here with my wrist. Back step. One other point I want to try to make is on all of these throws, I really want to try to cover up his body and try to get the fall. In freestyle technique, if I hit a throw and he goes to his back, I got 3 points. He rolls right away, I still scored 3 points. In collegiate, if I hit a throw like this, he rolls across his back, I don't have control, I basically just wasted my energy. Because I didn't get control of the match, there's no point scored there. So, in freestyle and technique, I try to teach guys to really go ahead and try to cover up his body on the finish. As I throw him, I really want to try to keep this hook that I have with his wrist, with my wrist and his bicep. I'm going to try to cover up his body and go ahead and try to get either a fall or back points. I throw him, cover up his body, and try to get back points. Or try to get the fall. Another variation I try to hit that technique off of is I'll attack the opposite side of his body. So I'll either go for a 2-on-1 or I'll shove his elbow to his body because I want this hand to come up for me. When this hand comes up on this side, that's when I'll hit a technique. Okay. So sometimes I can get wrist control or just push on the elbow, hand comes up on the other side, overhook it, hook it with my wrist. The other technique that I want to do is, instead of loading them up on my hips, I'll go ahead and do the full 270-degree turn. I'll take them right down to the mat without really a high amplitude type of throw. So again, I want this shoulder to come up, this hand to come up on top of my shoulder. I'm hooking the elbow, and I'm just going to go ahead and spin down to the mat. And basically twist like a little corkscrew underneath them. Again, this time, I'm not loading them up on my hips and hipping into them to throw them up high. I just want to twist underneath full 270 degrees. So I hook his wrist, back step, twist my legs up underneath, and twist them down. Again, I want to keep the lock, try to get the fall. Cover up his body, try to keep him on his back. Staggered step, back step, twist my feet. I'm in a full 270 degrees away from where I started out. Twist them down to the mat. Again, the key to this one is really keeping this wrist on top of that forearm. Keep all this nice and tight. Another variation I'll try to hit is sometimes I can't quite get the forearm, but if I can just catch his wrist. Right here, again, I want to open up the palm of my hand, and just like I used this part of his forearm and his bicep, now I might be able to only catch his wrist. It's the same type of a hook, though. I want to hook that to my body, opening up my palm of my hand so it doesn't slip back out. He tries to pull that out. I have it hooked with this part of his wrist and my wrist locked in there. So again, I'll set him up by attacking one side of his body. I want this nice and tight to me, and I back step. Again, on this technique, it's really hard to go ahead and get a high amplitude throw when I only have his wrist. So it's much safer if I just go ahead and do a little corkscrew underneath and go 270 degrees. Right here. Again, I try to catch his wrist, opening up the palm of my hand, nice and wide. Come up underneath, twisting down to full 270 degrees. And I have this hooked right here so it doesn't slip out. The wrist, I would say, is more important than even the forearm coming up underneath. So again, twist. This is nice to have nice and tight, but this is not really what's going to hold him in there. This right arm that I have holding on either the elbow or his wrist is really what's going to keep his arm from slipping back out. Right here. Again, I want to arch back it, try to keep him on his back, get the fall. The type of arm throw I like to hit is oftentimes an opponent will get an underhook on me. So in an underhook position, I really want to go ahead and try to pull the underhook away from him as much as possible. But again, I want to get his momentum to push back into me. I go into a staggered stance. I'm using the same motion as I did with the other arm throw. Back step, twist. So again, he has an underhook. He gets an underhook. I go into a staggered stance, back step, and twist. an underhook. Back step and twist. So one key point I want to make on this one is when he gets the underhook, to do this technique, I really want to try to pinch his wrist with my elbow. Just like we had the lock before on the other arm throw where I used this palm of my wrist to hook it on his wrist, this time I'm going to use my elbow pinched on his wrist. This is the key to this technique. Again, when he pushes into me, I try to get him to push back. I go into the staggered stance, back step. I keep the wrist with my elbow. Again, a back step. This wrist, this elbow with my hand is nice to have, but it's not as important. I really won't be able to hold on to his arm as much if I don't have this elbow control. So the wrist, I can hold on to his elbow with my wrist, but I really have to try to pinch that elbow down. So a lot of times I'll go ahead and just let that go as long as I have this nice and tight. My elbow on that wrist. Another point I want to try to make on that, on the underhook position, is he's really big in the underhook. I can't really hit the technique if he's got a real strong underhook from this position. I'm not really in a position to hit a throw from here. So I want to recover from this position. If he gets an underhook all the way down to here, I really want to go ahead and think about my elbow on his wrist. So I'll cover it all up, put my body on this side to get my elbow back up on top of his wrist, right here. He has a real strong underhook. I want to cover that up, take that away from him. Now I'm in a position to throw. Keep the wrist. Over under, I'm covering up the wrist with the elbow. Back step. Hold him on his back. Another variation off this over-under position is what I call like a back arch arm spin. Instead of getting a real staggered stance and hitting the back step, I'm just going to go ahead and do the back arch, arch all the way back. Notice my feet right here. I step up, and I'm going to go ahead and do a back arch just like we drilled that technique before. Again, I want to pinch his elbow in because at the last minute I'm going to turn into him, try to get him to go to his back. So I'm in an over-under position. My arm that's underneath on his opposite side is going to come up underneath right here. And from here I'm going to back arch. Mostly what I want to do is back arch, and at the last minute I'm going to turn into him. Right here. Again, really I can't stress enough how important it is to pinch this elbow with my elbow, pinch his wrist with my elbow. And I step into a back arch position. His hand comes up underneath, and I punch it to the sky. Right here. Over under position. I push into him. I really want him to push back into me. From here I'll just back arch. Keep his wrist. Another variation of that same type of back arch technique I can use without the underhook. Use the shoulder tie up. Use the wrist control that I had before. I really want to push back into him, and instead of using the back step technique that I did with the 270 degree turn or hipping into him, I'm going to use a back arch technique. Throw my arm to the sky, back arch, and turn into him at the last minute. Again, I push into him. He pushes back. Try to catch his elbow with my wrist. Push in. He pushes back. Line my feet up. Square. Back arch. Last minute turn into him. Again, I want to cover him up and try to get the fall. One other variation I like to hit this arm spin from is from a drag. So I'll get wrist control, or maybe I might just reach up for a drag. But either way, I want to have wrist control, and I drag his arm by. And if he doesn't react to the drag, maybe I'll just go ahead and take the leg or spin around behind. Oftentimes, especially at higher level wrestlers, they'll react to this drag and run away from that. I want to chase the drag this direction. He wants to run away from this position. So that's the position I want him to go to, because I'm going to use that for a throw. So I drag, let him go around behind me. Use type of back step motion. I'm pivoting to get a throw. So Oftentimes I'll start out in a staggered stance, get him to reach up on the other side. So I drag that. I drag this, get him to react to that motion right there, go around behind me. I'll back step and get a throw. Just like we use our elbow on his wrist or our wrist on his wrist, it's real important that I hook this wrist to keep his arm from coming back out. So now I have my hand on his wrist to keep that tight. Again, I'll drag it as he goes around behind. I'm using this hook right here on his wrist to twist up underneath him and go ahead and load him up, take him to his back. Again, I want to try to hold him here for as long as I can. Try to get near fall points or back points. It's going to look like sometimes I'll set him up by touching his head. I want that hand to come up, drag it, throw him down to his back. On most of these throws, I really want to try to use the opponent's momentum to go up over the top of me. So once again, I want to really try to push into him to get him to push back. And it's that force that he's using pushing back into me that I'm going to try to get to continue to finish the throw. So it's real important that I really push into him and really get him to push back into me. As he's pushing back into me, now it's time to hit a throw. Take him to his back. Oftentimes, if you try to force a throw, and without him pushing back into me, he'll slip right out, and I'll miss it. I may even potentially give up a takedown if I attempt the throw, and I don't have any force with him coming back into me. So again, I'll set him up without telegraphing too much with my staggered stance. I really want to try to push into him to get him to push back. As he pushes back, I use his momentum to take him to the mat. Another setup that I like to use with that arm throw is to fake a leg attack. This often gets an opponent to sprawl his leg back and lean a little bit more up on top of me. So I'll have shoulders on top of his arms on top of my shoulder. And again, I want to try to push back into him a little bit. If he's a right leg lead guy, I'll try to get him to take that leg back a little bit. So I tap his knee, or maybe even change levels a little bit underneath it, get him to sprawl a little bit for me, and then I go ahead and back step into a good throwing position. I grab wrist control as one of the setups over the top. I attack a knee, and as he pushes back into me or sprawls into me, I go ahead and twist, take him to his back. In a little more of a live situation, I'm wrestling with an opponent. He's in a staggered stance. Attack his knee a little bit. Again, I'll fake. Attack his. Another technique I like to hit is a headlock, and a lot of times I'll try to get this from like an over-under position or like a car position. And again, I want to be in a staggered stance. I'm going to twist my hips, almost like I'm back stepping. I'm twisting my hips underneath them, and I'm loading them up. Take him down to his back. Again, from this side, I'll take his wrist control, or his elbow control from under it. Take his head, I'm punching my arm past his head. I hook his elbow, his wrist again with my elbow. So again, I want to get like a back step or really get him to step around behind me. A lot of times I'll go ahead and if we're in over-under position, I'll pull him a little bit to get him to step around behind. I want to pull him and use that momentum that he's got going around behind me to continue to throw. Pull him. Another way we can hit that technique is almost like off an underhook position. Right here, he's got inside tie. I got almost like the arm spin position that we had. Again, I got head control. I'm using my back step, twisting motion to go ahead and continue with the throw. So on one technique, we're over the arm, and this one, we're underneath the arm. Right here. Again, I'm using his head for like a headlock. A lot of times I'll try to get him to at least go around behind me just a little bit without telegraphing too much that I'm about to hit a throw. I want him to step behind me so I can back step easier. Back step. I have a throw. Over, blocking him, any shots he might have. Pulling around behind me. Back step. Throw. Another variation for this one is I hit a 2-on-1. As he posts up on my shoulder or on my head, I come up for the underhook position that I just had before. This hand comes up around his neck. Headlock. I want him to post up on my neck. I'm going to use that to get the headlock position. I want to go ahead and hook his arm. Hook that hand that's on my neck. Hook his arm. And use the headlock. Hand that's on the 2-on-1 comes up around his head. Back step. Twist. Okay, another variation I would like to hit that headlock position from is from an overhook. I have an overhook, he has an underhook on me. I'll get wrist control. Right here, I want to go ahead and load him up in a position where I can hit a headlock from. Same thing, I want to really kind of catch his neck with my arm, and I really got to have this wrist control. Again, he has an underhook on me. I counter by grabbing his wrist and pushing down on the overhook. And I want to set him up for a throw in a nice back step position. Headlock with my arm and pull his wrist across my body. Twist. Wrist control, back step. Headlock with my forearm. Keep the wrist, pull that across my body. Another variation I like to hit off of that technique is when he has an underhook position on me, I'll go ahead and hit his neck. If I can't get wrist control, I can't get this tight enough to hit a headlock from, I'll hit his neck, and I'm going to come back with this neck position and pull him back over his body. All right? Misker. Okay, again, he's got an underhook on me. I'm going to go ahead and step behind his leg after I pop his neck. I'm pulling his head back over to straighten him back up over his leg. I step behind it so there's no way he can step out of that. From here, I put my hand inside of his crotch or just basically guide him down to the mat. Again, he's got underhook position on me. I got wrist control. Maybe I'm trying to hit a headlock. He's aware of the headlock. So I pop his neck. I step behind his leg and pull him back up, straighten him back up. Go back over his leg to the mat. Headlock. Step behind his leg. Keep his neck and pull him back over his head. Another way to hit a headlock is off of a counter to an attack. He's on his knees, opponent's on his knees, and we're both I'm in a wizard position. I have an overhook. He's got his arm wrapped around my body. From here, I'm going to shove his head down like in a quarter Nelson position. Try to shove his head down. If he lets me, I'll go ahead and turn him over to his back. Most opponents will fight back from this, so shove his head back up. I want this action to come. I want his head to fight back up into me because I'm using this position right here to get the headlock. Release his head, come around his neck, and get a headlock. So again, it's from a wizard position. I have a wizard. I'm shoving his head down. I want him to fight back up into me. As he's fighting his head back up into me, I'm still pushing it away. Before at the last minute, I'll release it. Come with a headlock. Got a wizard position. Shoving his head down. He fights back up. The last sec, I release it and come around for a headlock. Again, I want to pinch his elbow in nice and tight. Try to keep him on his back. Try to get back points. He's on his knees. I want to shove his head down. I want to fight back up into me. Take him to his back. Real good counter to a common position to throw from is where both wrestlers are in an over-under position, and one opponent happens to get a bi-lock position. Bi-lock position, we're both in an over-under position, and I go ahead and get a bi-lock. From here, I want to go ahead and suck his hips up into my hips, and I want to get my hips basically kind of underneath his, so I can lift him. Simple position I can do a throw from here is to just basically try to get behind that knee and just take him down to his back. So I'm in an over-under position. I have a body lock. I lock my hands up behind his body. I pull in, I load my hips up right behind his, and I block his knee with my knee. I use that knee, that block right there, to just take him down to the mat. Right there. Again, we start out over-under position. I'm loading them up. I happen to get a body lock. From here, I should be able to get a takedown. Step behind that knee, take him down to the mat. Again, from a different angle, over-under position, a body lock, step behind that knee, and now I'm just sagging him down to the mat. So another variation off of that is over-under position, body lock. Now instead of just stepping behind and sagging, I'm going to go ahead and step right here, but I'm going to do a back arch and throw him to his back. Okay? So it's going to look like this. Step behind him, back arch, take him to his back. So again, body lock position, step behind him, I'm going to load him up on my hips. I'm not afraid to do a back arch. I'm taking him to his back. Again, I want to cover him up and try to get the fall. Okay, again from a different angle. I got a body lock position. I step behind him. I'm going to go and load him up on my hips, do a back arch, take him to his back. One other technique I like to try to do is basically a fireman's, except we're going to go ahead and throw him. A fireman's technique is right here. I come up underneath and I load him up, just basically like how a fireman's takes the burning body out of the building. On this technique, I want to continue with the penetration step where I penetrate with one leg. I'm going to come back through with the trail leg penetration step, twist his body up, and try to throw him down to the mat. Okay, so I get wrist control. I hit a fireman's penetration step. A lot of times he'll react to this a little bit by stepping out, but I keep this nice and tight. I pinch his arm next to my head. I continue with my penetration step forward, take him down to the mat. Again, I'll start out with wrist control, step in like a regular fireman's position, and continue with my penetration step. Trail leg comes back up. Pinch everything in nice and tight next to my head. I go in this direction. Right here, wrist control. Step in penetration step. Trail leg comes back through. A lot of times he'll step out of that. Take him down on the mat. On that last fireman's technique, I came down to a low level. I penetrated down. I actually touched my knees on the mat. And we can hit this technique without coming down that low. If I basically just want to get underneath his arm, change levels enough to get underneath his arm, and I can continue with basically the same technique, except I'm not at a lower level, I'm at a higher level right here. So it's going to be more of a throw. I hit this on the mat. Again, I want to duck underneath this arm, and I almost use his momentum as he reacts to this technique as I duck underneath here. A lot of times I'll go this direction to run away from this, and I really got to pinch this into the side of my head, step over here, and I'm in a position to throw now. So it's a penetration step that I continue going. One leg comes forward and continuing the same step. I pinch everything in nice and tight. Again, start with wrist control. Duck up underneath this arm. Pinch everything in nice and tight, and I'm twisting into his body right here. Another way to hit a different type of a throw is off of the 2-on-1 position. 2-on-1, I have 2-on-1 control right here. And mostly I want to try to step in between his body. I want to get between his legs right here and load his arms up into his chest. So I'm basically going to shove his arm up into his chest and make his body do a roll so he rolls over to his back. So from here, I got 2-on-1 position. I step nice and tight in front. I keep the 2-on-1 and twist his body into his back. 2-on-1 position. Step in front of him. squat down, arch back up, and cover his body, try to get back points. Okay, I start out with 2-on-1 position. Shove into him. I want him to really push back up into me before I step down in front of him. I get back points. Again, 2-on-1 control. Push into him. I want him to push back into me. I square my feet up and go into a squatting position underneath him. And I want to shove everything back up into his stomach and into his chest. Get him to go to his back. Again, on this other technique I want to try to do, a variation off this 2-on-1 position, is I want to go ahead and get his wrist, and almost like the 2-on-1 where we had right here, 2-on-1 controlled, I'm going to go ahead and get an over hook on this 2-on-1 and pinches my elbow to his wrist. Keep that in nice and tight to my body. From here, I'm going to go ahead and do a different throw where I come up around the backside with my other hand. To get there, a lot of times I'll start out with the wrist control and basically just crawl up his arm. I want to go get elbow control like I'm dragging it, but I want to pinch this into my body. Pinch this in nice and tight right here. From here, I'm basically in a not too threatening position, although he's probably feeling a little bit uncomfortable. He's probably not going to stay here very long, but I can still keep him in nice and tight with the elbow control with my wrist, and I pinch his wrist with my elbow. So again, I'm coming up around his backside with my other hand. I try to hook his lat. So to see that, this hand's coming around behind his back, and I hook his lat with my wrist. I want to pinch his wrist with my elbow, and I want to catch his elbow with my hand. Keep it in nice and tight. I basically put my head underneath his chin. I come up, grab his lat, and the same thing as the 2-on-1 position, I'm basically going to step between his feet and squat down in front of him. Arch back up. So to get there again, I'll grab his wrist, maybe crawl up his arm, and get into this position where I have my head buried into his neck. I have his wrist pinched with my elbow, and I have his elbow with my hand. Again, I want to come back up his backside with my opposite left-hand wrist. And again, I'm going to step in front of him. My feet are stepped between his feet, right here. Lower my level, squat down, and be ready to arch back up. Again, this technique works pretty good if I can get him to push back into me just a little bit. So I'll crawl up his wrist. I'm going up his back with my arm. I shove back into him. I want him to push back into me just a little bit before I squat down in front of him. Right here. And again, I want to try to cover up his body and try to get back points. Arm throws are one of my favorite techniques while I competed internationally. Hopefully you learned some techniques in this video that you can use in your repertoire.